Hi everyone, it's the Libertarian Advisor, and today I'm here to shoot holes in the left's theory that Bill Clinton did a great job for the economy. While it is true that the economy did flourish underneath Bill Clinton, there are a lot of things behind the scenes that the media certainly isn't telling you about, not because they're trying to deceive you, but probably because they're actually too stupid to actually know why the economy flourished underneath Bill Clinton. So the first thing I want to do is just address some of the more traditional reasons you hear people say. You hear people say things like, oh, well, it was a Republican-controlled House. Well, that was true for the latter portion of the years, and while it is true that Congress does have more sway over an economy because they do control the purse, that isn't really the main reason that things took off underneath Clinton. You also hear people say things like, oh, well, George H.W. Bush, he set the groundwork, and really it was Clinton who was just reaping from his benefits. And again, while that may be true, I'm not sure if that was the absolute best reason, because the absolute number one reason why the economy was doing great was something called demographics. Now, Harry Dent wrote a book called The Demographic Cliff, and in it, he goes over the fact that the average American spends the most amount in their lifetime at age 46. Now, what was happening, so now kind of back things up a little bit. So at age 46, that's when, traditionally you're going to be in the biggest house you're going to be in. The kids are, about to graduate for college, so that means they're costing you a lot of money, hitting you up to maybe buy you a car, you're on the cell phone bill, you got to buy clothes at the mall. There's all sorts of stuff you've got to spend your money on. So what we can do using demographics as a leading indicator is we can look at, and again, this is a chart from the Demographic Cliff, we can look at, let's say, 1946 is when the baby boomers started being born, 1947, 48, 49 is when things really started taking off. So what happens if we take 1946 and then, 1947 and then add 46 years to it? You get 1993. Now, who was coming into power in 1993? That would be William Jefferson Clinton was coming into power in 1993. So really what he was is he was the beneficiary of the baby boomers, the largest generation in history up until that point. Now the Millennials are bigger. He was the beneficiary of the largest generation, hitting their absolute peak spending years right as he was entering office. So basically you could have a monkey up there and they probably would have had a hard time screwing things up. Now, in Econ 101, one of the very first things you learn is that the president can do very little while they're in office to, really affect any positive change. There's like I said earlier, the Congress is more important because they control the purse. Now, there's a whole lot of things both of those guys can do to mess things up while they're in office, but to actually, change the huge major macroeconomic forces, that takes a lot longer than 8 years in most cases. The other thing is, you got the Federal Reserve chairperson. They hold infinitely more power than the president. There's lots of things they can do to either help or hurt an economy. Now, anyone who's been following me for really, it's only been about 3 weeks that I've been doing these shows, but for people that have known me in the past, I've been a major critic of the Fed, and that's how I really kind of woke up to everything that was going on in the first place. But getting back to demographics, over here we actually have the immigration adjusted birth index, and then we do see, when different countries, when their peak spending years should occur based upon demographics. In America, it's 2007. In Japan, let's say it was 1996. They've been in a 20-year depression or recession, depending on how you look at it. And very coincidentally enough, that started right around their time their peak spending, plateaued. And kind of getting back to the millennials for just 1 second, is that I don't think that this maximum of spending the most amount of money at age 46 is going to hold true for my generation. The reason being is that, people, I actually started my day in finance the day the market crashed, the day Lehman crashed, September 15th, 2008. Great time to, start working on in finance. Fantastic time. But a lot of my peers, excuse me, my daughter got me sick this weekend, going to the Trump rally tomorrow, so, need to watch my voice a little bit. But getting back to the millennials, the reason why I don't think that will hold true for them is because, a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I know, they had to, delay starting their career. They had to take jobs that, they weren't, that were probably kind of beneath them. Maybe they had to stay in school longer, so they had to graduate with more debt. So, here we got charts that show, U.S. birth rate dropping, average age of mothers increasing, student loan balances increasing throughout the years. And so, with an average student, let's say when I graduated 2008, of having about $20,000 in student loan debt, that means you don't have money to go buy a house. But first, it probably means you don't have money for a wedding ring. So, I know how to take out, a credit card to help buy my wife a wedding ring. As a financial planner, probably a bad idea. But anyways, with the average, person my age graduating with $20,000 in debt, that means, you aren't getting married. It means because you can't afford to. It means you're delaying buying your first home. Then it means, you're probably not able to then have kids. So it's just like this whole chain reaction of events, and it all has to do with demographics. Okay, we're not here to talk about the millennials. Now, the other thing that Bill Clinton had going on is that his vice president created the internet. Imagine that. Al Gore created the internet, among many other things he supposedly has done great. But one of the inconvenient truths is that he basically set the stage along with the Federal Reserve to create a massive bubble that then was pricked, right as he was, exiting, getting out of Dodge. And then he had the Federal Reserve after him, who admitted that they needed to inflate a housing bubble to then make sure to replace the dot-com bubble. I think it was Greenspan that said that, or Bernanke. But either way, pretty outrageous. So also, I'm a huge critic of George Bush. Probably, very few people are more critical of George Bush than me. But I am somebody, though, that is based on facts and reality. The GDP, which I also have a video coming out, and if it already is out by now, we'll edit that back in there, on why the GDP is not the best measure of economic productivity. But for now, that's what people use. Clinton leaving office, his high point, GDP, right around, let's call it 10.6 trillion. In the worst times of George Bush, you're still looking at 14. So he's not an economic god, and he's a fucking idiot, but yet the fucking idiot did a better job from an actual pure number standpoint than Bill Clinton. And again, I think they're both fucking idiots, which is why I don't want either one of them running things. And we've also seen the collusion of, the Bush and Clinton crime syndicate now basically joining forces to cover up all their crimes. You call it the cement of blood, where, they all know where the bodies are buried. I mean, Hillary, her skeletons in her closet probably rival like a mortician. So it's just all this corruption going on back and forth. And now you see the Bushes endorsing Hillary Clinton for president. So if it wasn't obvious, 10 years ago, like it was to me, it's pretty damn obvious now how they're colluding together. So now you see the debt underneath Clinton still going up. So, he did not reduce the debt. The debt was higher when he left office. Now, there was a tiny time period right here where the debt went down the tiniest of bits. And that's everything the Democrats are hanging their heads at. Like, would I love to be sitting at $4.5 trillion of debt today, $5 trillion of debt today? Of course. Would I love to have a balanced budget? Of course. But today, people that want to balance a budget are called extremists. Another thing that was going on that isn't reported is that you had people paying, those same baby boomers, getting back to demographics, paying the most amount into Social Security that they would ever pay into. And that money, instead of being set aside like it was supposed to be, was put to the general fund. And the general fund, as we all know, just gets pissed away, starting wars, militarization of the police, all these social welfare programs, corporate welfare, that's a lot worse than the social welfare. It goes on and on and on and on and on. All the pork barrel spending. But what you can see is around 2010, you had, because what used to happen is kind of back things up a little bit. You used to have 100 people paying into the system. I think it was actually 159.4. It's weird how my brain works, but I'm pretty sure that was a number paying into the system for every one person. Now it's a little bit like, it's like 2.2, 2.1 that's paying in for every one person collecting benefits. So demographics state that this is not a great trajectory we're on, and I don't care if Jesus was elected president or even my idol Ron Paul was elected president. There's very little that they can do in such a short amount of time to really turn the ship around, because it's been a long time of having malfeasance from both the Democratic and the Republican parties. Now, another thing Clinton did is, I think it was 93, 94, signed NAFTA. You can see the manufacturing jobs just plummeting. Basically, it was a huge crony corporate insider deal where, the largest Fortune 500, mega tycoons that are out there, use this to play countries off against one another and really to enrich their own shareholders. Now, I work in the stock market, so, everything I'm saying is kind of working against my own self-interest, but I do have children, and my goal is to make sure that that I leave the world better than how I found it. That's not the end, so let's keep going. So one thing that always drives me nuts is hearing how it was George W. Bush who deregulated Wall Street. Well, let's do something that liberals actually hate. I'm about to drop the F word, facts. It was 1999 when Bill Clinton got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act came from the Great Depression, separated retail banking from investment banking. Now, the reason they wanted to get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act is because Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, Robert Rubin, former, had his previous stint at Goldman Sachs, working there for 26 years, where he was the co-chairman. He was lobbied by somebody by the name of John Reed over at Citi. Now, notice how I didn't say Citigroup, because he wanted to buy the Travelers Group. So what they did was, by getting rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, they were able to merge both of those two entities together. So then that meant that the banks could now, get a huge amount of derivatives. I think recently it was JP Morgan that actually had their derivatives portion of the book is now siloed into their FDIC portion of their book. Again, I'm kind of just making this part up. It wasn't really in my mental script of what I was going to talk about. But getting back to Robert Rubin, so it was John Reed over at Citi that was lobbying him to get the bill passed. And then let's take a guess at where Mr. Robert Rubin went to go work after his stint at the Treasury. He went to go work for the now newly merged Citigroup. While at Citigroup, he was paid $120 million. And then, but when he left on actually my birthday in 2009, so happy birthday to myself, he left not before securing $45 billion in bailout funds. So here's a guy who lobbies for the legislation that then led to the financial crisis, that then gets a huge payday for basically creating a crisis, and then he used all of our fucking money to then pay himself $120 million. This is absolutely criminal. Now he sits on the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, which I could go on for probably about 3 hours about that. If you don't know what the CFR is, it's in the article, so I'd go read it. Dick Cheney was in it, Hillary Clinton was in it, and by in it, I mean they were directors of it, so right at the bat, anything that Dick Cheney and Hillary Clinton are both, leading up at one point, it's bad. The current president, his name is Richard Haas. He has a paper called Sovereignty and Globalization, where in the paper he actually states that the United States needs to cede its powers to international bodies if we're ever going to have, basically a one world government work. So, these are bad people. These are the people that fund almost every candidate. I think Trump is, the one exception, Gary Johnson too and Jill Stein, they're exceptions, but almost every time when you see an R or a D by their name, you can guarantee, it's somebody that is being backed by huge corporate globalist interests almost every single time. Now, the last point I want to make about the financial crisis is, we've talked about deregulating Wall Street, we've talked about the dot-com, we've talked about demographics, but one thing we didn't talk about is who initially sued the government in the first place, not the government, but who initially sued as a community organizer, Citi in the first place, forcing them to sell and make subprime loans. That guy's name was Barack Hussein Obama. So now you've got Obama suing Citi, forcing them to make subprime loans, forcing them to loan in undesirable areas to undesirable people, and then most of those loans ended up going bad. I mean, there's a record on it. It's in the article too. But so now you've got Obama coming to power in 2009, blaming the Republicans for deregulating Wall Street, false. You've got him, blaming Republicans for the housing crisis, false. I mean, this is the guy that is actually the most responsible person probably of anybody besides maybe Robert Rubin for creating this crisis. And now, he then gets to then, fix everything. And really what he's done is create a huge bubble that's being fueled by the Federal Reserve, being fueled by low interest rates. The Federal Reserve is absolutely trapped right now. I've got articles about, where interest rates are going. I've got, other articles, showing, basically how a fraud the whole system is and where money comes from. So, and if they're not out now, they're probably going to be out at some point. So make sure you guys check those out. But again, my goal in making this was just, I know people are going to read, a 2,000, 3,000 word article that I have, and for those who do, I really appreciate it. But people will watch videos, they will watch this. This is very important information. I've never really heard anybody kind of lay it out, and so this is me just kind of just doing a data dump, with no notes up here. And hope you guys enjoyed. Please pass it on. Please share. Please leave your comments. And again, really appreciate it, and thank you for watching. Take care.